Hello, my name is Michael Dewan Herrick. I'm a psychotherapist and a life coach with over 40 years of experience, currently in private practice in London. I started this channel a couple of years ago to post things relevant to psychotherapy and personal development. For the past year, I've mostly offered my thoughts under the title Questioning Woke Psychotherapy. In this video, I'm going to take a break from that and talk about something else: vulnerability. What's good, bad, and ugly about it. I'll be talking about vulnerability as our basic shared human condition, but I'll also talk about revealing those vulnerabilities to others, what motivates us to do such a thing, and what can happen when we do. I'll suggest how it can turn out great. There are important benefits to be had, but it can also go wrong. I'll talk about what makes a difference. As a psychotherapist, I can tell you that not much happens in therapy if clients aren't willing to reveal their vulnerabilities. How I listen and respond pretty much defines my job, so I've thought a lot about it. 13 years ago, American social work academic Brene gave a TED Talk on the topic of vulnerability. It went viral and to date has been viewed 22 million times. Chances are you've seen it. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. She makes a great case for the value of revealing our vulnerabilities to others. She has since gone on to say a great many other things about it. While making a strong argument for the value of being vulnerable, she also cautions that we need to exercise discernment and boundaries. It is unwise and dangerous to share everything with everyone. Brown has influenced my own thinking on this topic, so what I will say in this video will likely echo what she has said and written, but mostly I'm drawing on my tens of thousands of hours of direct experience as a therapist, hearing countless stories of vulnerability. I have my own take on it. I will include a link to Brown's seminal TED Talk in the description below in case you haven't seen it. Before I talk about sharing painful, difficult things with others, let's first consider our general human condition of vulnerability, whether we choose to share these things with others or not. We are not all equally immediately vulnerable to all of the things I'm going to mention, but they are all potentially true and at some point inevitable for all of us, even if they're just things we worry about. Much could be said about each item, but I'll go through this list quickly. These are the basic kinds of things that we fear, even if they aren't currently happening. Some are often things that Mark Twain was referring to when he said, quote, "I've lived through some terrible things, some of which actually happened." As you hear them, see which ones resonate with you. Sickness, injury, and death. Impermanence, change, and loss. Mistreatment, abuse, neglect, injustice, manipulation, and abandonment. Reputational damage, exclusion, cancellation, and exile. Losing competitions. Failure to achieve our goals. Making wrong decisions. Uncertainty, confusion, and having false perceptions of reality. Dependence on countless interconnected systems that provide for our needs and are subject to disruption and collapse. This includes ecological, economic, political, social, and physical infrastructure systems. There are more, but these vulnerabilities are sufficient to point out the major ways our sense of well-being can be compromised or even destroyed. All human beings are vulnerable in all of these ways, although to different degrees over time. Anxiety and depression are the primary reasons that people seek therapy. Both states, one way or the other, are a consequence of something having gone wrong in one or more of these areas of vulnerability, or often simply the fear that it might go wrong. Even when anxiety and depression or any other mental health problems are attributed to biochemical and neurological causes, they can be considered a physical abnormality or illness. Every one of the thousands of people I've worked with have come to therapy because they are struggling with one or more of these basic vulnerabilities. Imagining and striving toward a condition of invulnerability preoccupies most people. Maybe that's putting it a bit strongly, but to some degree, believe it's true. But such a condition is unattainable. That doesn't mean that there's no point in doing anything to guard against misfortune and calamity. We can, should, and need to navigate and cope with our many vulnerabilities while also accepting the basic conditions of life. In this way, we cultivate our resilience. Hold this in mind as I talk about the vulnerability of opening up to others. I think it's the key to understanding the good, the bad, and the ugly of doing so. The good comes from not denying the reality of our vulnerability, coupled with cultivating our resilience. The bad and the ugly come from denial and not learning how to navigate and cope with what life throws at us. We could ask ourselves where we're coming from when we reveal our vulnerabilities to others. We can also pay attention to where others are coming from when we share our personal struggles with them. What is our motive for being vulnerable with others? What do we want to get out of it? Not all motives lead to good results. Here are a few problematic motivations. They all involve some degree of trying to manipulate others. Our motive might be to elicit sympathy in order to get out of an agreement, obligation, or responsibility. There are times when it is necessary to explain legitimate reasons why we're not able to do something. I'm talking about times when the vulnerability we share may be technically true, but we're milking it to avoid doing something we can and should do, but we just don't want to. This includes indirectly eliciting assistance or help in doing something that we can and should do for ourselves. We might reveal our vulnerability to get confirmation that we are a victim and a bad person, people, or situation is to blame. This may be true, but again, are we just wanting confirmation so that we can linger and wallow in blame and resentment? Are we avoiding our own responsibility for what has happened to us and what we may need to do next? Some pour their hearts out to others so that they can suckle endlessly at the breast of warm, unconditional, positive regard and empathy and avoid doing difficult things. This might be what we need to start with. It feels really good, but we can get stuck in it, even addicted to it. What, then, is a better motivation? What do we want when we open up to others? I often think we want and need a witness who won't judge us, who is capable of empathy and understanding, who makes us feel less alone and more connected to the human family. Someone who is gently curious about our experience, asks questions without pushing or being intrusive. Someone who appreciates our feelings and validates them when they naturally correspond to what's happened to us. We may also want to be reminded of our virtues and strengths. We may not ask for this, but a helpful listener will offer it. We may want authentic encouragement that is not just cheerleading. Being open to being challenged is also a good motivation. If we have a blind spot, maybe they will point it out. Maybe we did have a hand in causing our own pain and suffering. We may want some feedback. Seeking confirmation that we are a horrible person is not a good motivation. We could be open to challenges that are kind and not aggressive and given in the spirit of believing we can handle it. We may want some advice, but only if we ask for it. These all seem to me like positive motivations for being vulnerable that can make our sharing worthwhile. All right, what about those we choose to be vulnerable with? What about them? What are the different ways that they can respond or react? The bad and the ugly news first. I'll mention 11 things that people can do that make it unwise to be vulnerable with them. I'll keep it brief. Then I'll describe the kind of responses that make a person worthy of sharing our struggles with. So, 11 unhelpful ways that people respond. 1, they judge you. Often people will see us as weak, incompetent, or morally compromised when we share our pain. They will think less of us. 2, they'll use it against you. Some people will take what we share as evidence of an exploitable weakness and use it to gain an advantage over us at some point. 3, they engage in what I'd call pain competition. This is when people don't just listen, but take the opportunity to talk about their own pain, even trying to outdo our story with their own and shift attention to themselves. 4, they gossip. People can find it irresistible to tell others what they have learned about us, even if shared in confidence. This can have all kinds of unwanted consequences. 5, they pity us. Pity can have the connotation of empathy and compassion, but more often it's about feeling sorry for another and seeing them as pitiful, if not pathetic, and no one really wants to be seen like that. 6, they're indifferent. Some people just won't care. They may try to make the right sounds, but you can tell they aren't interested and they don't feel much, if anything, about what they're hearing. 7, they avoid us. Some people avoid by changing the topic of conversation. Other people will go out of their way to not encounter us when we've been vulnerable with them. They might even cut us out of their life. This can hurt. But maybe they're saving us the trouble of having to do the same. 8, they minimize our pain. This is that person who says, it's not so bad, it could be worse, and so forth, as if we shouldn't be feeling what we're feeling because they see our problems as trivial. 9, they bomb us with toxic positivity. This is when a person leaps immediately to saying things like, when one door closes, another one opens. Every failure is a learning opportunity. There are lots of fish in the sea. Look on the bright side, and so forth. It's not such things aren't true, but these people can't tolerate being with you when you're feeling pain and want you to move away from it and out of it as soon as possible. 10, they enable. Sometimes when we're vulnerable and seeking sympathy and wanting to blame others for our pain, people can immediately jump on our side. This can enable us to avoid doing difficult things to address our problems. They endorse our excuses and justifications for not taking responsibility for anything, no matter how lame. 11, they offer unsolicited advice and assume a caretaker role. Although these are two different things, I put them together because they're related. One way to avoid being present with the feeling of pain is to offer solutions and advice. If that is the case and it wasn't asked for, and especially if it's crap advice, then being vulnerable with such a person is probably unwise. Caretakers are people who see taking care of others as their primary identity and don't know any other way to be in a relationship. Their identity and relationship with you depend on you having a problem that they can help you with. This is an unfortunate match for the person who wants to endlessly suckle at the breast of warmth and empathy and be taken care of. Eventually, this does not go well. By the way, most therapists start out with somewhat of a caretaker identity, and many never get past it. So, despite the many wonderful things we hear about allowing ourselves to be vulnerable with others, there are many good reasons to be cautious and discerning about who we choose to be vulnerable with. These are just 11 things to be mindful of. If someone responds consistently in one or more of these ways, they probably aren't worthy of being told certain things about us. Unfortunately, most, if not all of us, have experienced these kinds of responses when being vulnerable with others. When this has happened repeatedly and in severe ways, it can result in shutting down and choosing to share very little with anyone. There's a kind of learned helplessness, where we conclude that no one can be trusted. We stop trying, and so never get to experience a worthy listener. This is sad. If you like this video, please take a moment to give it a like, and if you aren't already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. You could also leave me a comment and share this with a friend. Thanks, I appreciate it. Okay, let's get back to the topic. So, what kind of person is worthy of being vulnerable with? What kinds of responses are helpful? I suggest the following, which tend to align with good motivations for sharing in the first place. Someone who is first of all willing to simply be a non-judgmental witness. They listen to our story and remain empathically present with our feelings. They don't put themselves above us and may have demonstrated the capacity to be present with their own pain and be vulnerable in sharing it. They are curious to know more and gently ask questions while respecting our boundaries and not pushing. They validate our emotions when they are natural and appropriate to our story. And even if our feelings don't match their interpretation of our story, they can acknowledge our feelings are real, given how we see things. They know us well enough to remind us of our strengths and virtues without bombing us with toxic positivity. They encourage us without lapsing into rah-rah cheerleading. Whether we want it or not, they challenge us. They might ask if we got the story wrong, or if our interpretation of it is accurate. Also, without blaming the victim, and when they have earned our trust in other ways, they can challenge us on how our own decisions and actions may have contributed to our trouble. They don't do this to shame us, but to help us to recognize our own power to address our problems and perhaps do something different next time. They are willing to give advice, but only if asked for, and it comes from a place of fully understanding us and our situation first. It's not easy to find someone who fits all of these descriptions. But if we can find someone who tends to approximate these qualities and responses, then I would say they're worthy of being vulnerable with. Assuming we've chosen to be vulnerable with such a person, what good can come of it? It's still a mysterious process to me, but when we're vulnerable with the right person, someone who's fully present in the ways I've suggested, it helps to regulate our emotions and our nervous system. This happens even when we come away with no solutions, yet it makes our pain and problems more tolerable. This puts us in a more favorable state for working out our way forward. It also strengthens our relationship with a person and our general capacity for forming secure attachments. We can unlearn our helplessness and be more willing to reach out to others. Because of our fear of being vulnerable with others, we tend to construct what's called a false self. This is the persona we present to the world, our defense. It's who we pretend to be so that we can be accepted rather than rejected by others. This takes a lot of energy and effort. Eventually, we lose track of who we are and deny the reality of our experiences. Being vulnerable with others can help us to reconnect with our authentic self and be more honest with ourselves about our own life experiences. In this way, we have more self-awareness and gain back energy spent on putting up a false front. Being vulnerable with people who respond in the ways I have described tends to make it dawn on us that our vulnerabilities are not unique to us. They're part of the human condition and experienced one way or the other, and at some point, by everyone. This can relax our shame, which is a secondary and unnecessary complication on top of the primary challenge of navigating and coping with the many vulnerabilities in life. This is also mysterious to me, but somehow knowing that we're part of the human family relaxes this shame and brings a sense of peace. It doesn't necessarily fix anything. Our problems are still there, but somehow they're more bearable and workable. I want to talk about another issue that can come up when revealing our vulnerabilities to another. This is when we're relied upon significantly by that person. This is especially relevant when it comes to parents revealing their vulnerabilities to their children. It can arise between spouses too, as well as employers, business partners, or anyone who relies on us. Why is this an issue? Because it's difficult to listen to and empathize with someone if their ability to function well is compromised, and this may have an impact on our own well-being. It can be seriously anxiety-provoking for children when they're told of the troubles and vulnerabilities of their parents. I don't think this means that we shouldn't share any of our troubles with our children. It does mean that we should be aware of how they may be impacted and adjust the dosage of our sharing when we can. It could even be a good thing to reveal some of our vulnerabilities with our children if we can assure them of our resilience and ability to continue taking care of them. And very importantly, the purpose for sharing vulnerable things with our children should not be to get emotional support from them. It is our role to be there for them and not vice versa. They are not yet equipped for it. This may change later in life and become more flexible, but when children are young, burdening them with our own problems is damaging to them. What we do share should be given to them in small doses that we can help them process. This is not to seek support from them, but as a way of preparing them for the realities they will inevitably face as adults and model how these things can be handled. Some things are better left for sharing with someone who is not reliant on us for basic needs, especially our children. But of course, crises do arise, and it can be necessary to inform children, spouses, and others about what's going on. I'll tell you a personal story to illustrate this. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 3B colon cancer. A teacher at my daughter's school advised my wife that it would be better not to tell our 11-year-old daughter about it. I think she intended that we should not expose her to information that could cause her any anxiety. We didn't believe this was wise advice. So we told our daughter about my cancer and explained what it meant and what the treatment would involve. She visited me in the hospital. We described the surgery and explained what the chemotherapy was for and what the side effects would be. We did talk about how this was potentially fatal, but we were doing everything to prevent that. I didn't share my own fears and assured her that we were determined to beat Betty Lou, the name she gave to my cancer. She was told about and shown everything we were doing. Although we didn't protect her from experiencing any anxiety, my intention and hope was that the experience would contribute to her own resilience when encountering her own vulnerabilities in life. Had we tried to hide, lie about, or avoid what was happening, I believe that would have contributed to her own potential for avoidance and even more fear and anxiety in her future. There's more to this story. It also happens that my own father died of cancer when I was 11 years old. I and my siblings knew he was sick, but we weren't told what it was or how bad it was. Then suddenly, it seemed to us, he died after a year of hiding away from us, out of sight, while he wasted away. He was suddenly gone, and nothing was said about it. I mean, nothing. We were meant to carry on as if nothing had happened. Were we being protected? This was probably the most significant emotional wound of my life, and it took me decades to process it. Among other things, I drew from that experience a commitment to do better by my own children if confronted with the same or a similar situation. By the way, I've fully recovered, and due to a special blood test, I've been told there's a 98% certainty that my colon cancer will not recur. This has been a tremendous relief to me and my family. At the same time, my awareness of my own mortality has been made permanently more vivid and palpable to me. I am vulnerable. It hasn't gone unnoticed by me. In fact, it was a deliberate choice that I have just now been vulnerable with you. I don't know you, so I can't know which of the 12 responses might come my way. But I've taken that risk because my motivation was not to seek your empathy or support, or emotional support. It was to provide a personal example to illustrate the challenge of being vulnerable with our children. It was also to signal that I'm in the same human stew with you. While I'm trying to say smart, wise, and useful things, I'm above no one when it comes to vulnerability, and neither are you above or below anyone else. Well, I think that's enough, so I'll end with that. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other, because we're all vulnerable. Bye for now.